This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic, a results-focused agency that plans and buys all audio media. Check them out at trisonic.co.uk. That's trisonic.co.uk.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that really nicely sums up collaboration. It's hard.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. At a Thinkbox event in September, ITV, Sky, and Channel 4 announced Lantern, a new measurement panel aimed at tracking the short-term impact of TV advertising on sales. The goal for the initiative, which is aiming to fully launch in 2026 following a period of testing and requests for proposals, or RFPs, is to help provide TV with quote-unquote the measurement it deserves, in an era in which brands have increasingly demanded more outcomes-based measurement solutions rather than simply measuring audiences. Samir Modha is Measurement Innovation Lead for Commercial at ITV and sits on the commercial board of UKOM. Matt Hill is Director of Insight and Measurement at Sky Media and formerly the Director of Research and Planning at TV trade body Thinkbox. Both have had a strong hand in the early development of Lantern, and I was delighted to be joined by them both to discuss the project, its purpose, goals, and timeline, as well as the state of media measurement more broadly, and how measurement efforts need to grow to address the needs of advertisers in the future. This is that conversation. I hope you enjoy. Samir Modha and Matt Hill, it's great to have you both on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on. I'm keen to discuss the Lantern initiative in a moment, but first I wanted to get to know a little bit more about both of you first, how you started in this industry, and media research is a really interesting niche, and I'm not sure exactly how you get into it, frankly. I mean, a lot of people say they fall into media more generally, but research insights, especially within TV, fascinating. Samir, what drew you to TV measurement?
Oh, God. I'm not quite sure I can say TV measurement was the thing I wanted to do when I was in nappies, but it was more advertising, I suppose, was the draw for me. And I ran like a student ad agency at university and ended up kind of bailing out of my physics degree and doing social science, which then sort of very naturally led to generally being interested in data about people and how they do stuff and why they do stuff. And that over time led through different kinds of agencies all the way to now doing outcome measurement. My first love is probably data for insight, but that's sort of well covered in telly, whereas the outcome measurement piece isn't so much.
And Matt, what drew you to media, and then also you're now at Sky Media, not at Thinkbox after 10 years.
I am. I was on my way in here. I sort of knocked on the door or pushed the buzzer, and it was Matt from. It took me a little pause. I had to say Sky. I was going to say Thinkbox. So it's I'm still adjusting. I fell into media, as do most people I think who work in sort of media marketing. I completely sort of just lucked into it. My parents lived in Somerset, and there's a little cluster of TV research businesses in Taunton, which is the main town in Somerset, because there's one chap who set up a bar bureau, basically producing overnight. So sort of the overnight reports on who was watching what on telly the previous night. And I got a job there coming out of university, and that sort of just catapulted me into the world of media and into the world of audience measurement. And I've spent. I've worked a bit both sides in terms of the editorial side, in terms of sort of scheduling and helping with commissioning and acquiring content. And then I've sort of moved over to the dark side of advertising, where I stuck. Obviously, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to work for Thinkbox, which has been was an incredible 10 years of my life. I just settling into Sky, which is a different beast to Thinkbox. If you can sort of imagine going from working for a company that employs 20 people to one that employs 20,000, that's quite a step change. But I'm absolutely loving it so far.
What's been on your plate so far?
Oh gosh, it's really been about getting to meet everybody across the company. So getting to meet the senior leadership team. But I did last week. I went up to Manchester and we did our upfronts in Manchester. So I got sort of roped into that. So they're keen to sort of get me out there as quickly as possible.
Well, we're great. We're very grateful to have you here, especially as I want to talk about Lantern. This is a new initiative. It's definitely caught the industry's attention. It's a new joint measurement panel aimed at tracking especially short-term impacts of TV advertising. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know, Samir, that it also tracks longer term impacts because it is a panel, and you explained this to our audience at the Future of TV Advertising Global in December. When and how did the idea for Lantern come about in the first place? I think you said at the panel that it had been incubating in Thinkbox, or someone said at the panel that it had been incubating in Thinkbox for some time before it was brought to the broadcasters.
It's something that's been bubbling away around the sort of Thinkbox boardroom for a while. I think probably one of the first steps, I was chatting to Wayne in my team, who looks after a lot of the effectiveness work that we do within Sky, and I think you were having a conversation with Wayne way back, sort of 3 years ago.
For 4 years. Yeah, this was. I still remember. We both of us vividly remember that conversation, and I was just amazed to find, okay, here's someone who's leading the charge in terms of outcome measurement, and obviously that was stuff that I'd seen in my sort of platform job, and we just kept the conversation going really because there was more that we had in common than was different, and I was new to ITV, so I wasn't really sort of immersed in that whole sort of, you have to think of the other channels as the enemy and so on. I was just like, okay, here's a really difficult thing, and here's someone who's making good progress. And then over time we've all, Channel 4, ITV, Sky, all of us had been dabbling variously in outcome measurement because we all face the same business pressures. And then the lovely thing about bringing it under the sort of Thinkbox umbrella, with Matt's previous hat on, was that it's a sort of safe space in which to have those conversations, because it's an industry body. You're not going to be in any legal trouble because you're just talking about stuff that anybody can join in with. And we all just increasingly felt that there was something here that we could do, that it would be frankly stupid for us to do on our own, but that would be quite good to do together. And there was a sort of 6 months worth of proper conversations. I can't remember now. Yeah,
I think we were sort of discussing it for a while, but I think the key thing was that the board, so the commercial chiefs around the Thinkbox table, were all in avid agreement that this was an essential development for the future of TV. I think we'd obviously within Thinkbox we'd spent years and years producing a lot of effectiveness evidence that TV works, that TV is a very powerful driver of growth. And it works in the short term and it works in the long term. And to a certain degree around the board table was a bit of frustration, sort of going, hold on a sec, we're sitting on these piles of evidence of the power of telly, but we're not necessarily seeing the money follow. And what we are seeing is that Meta and Google, and we've seen it this year in terms of the AA walk numbers. The market's pretty flat, but they've got 10% growth, and we're talking, what's going on? And I think we're realizing that whilst this kind of evidence, this effectiveness data is very powerful and very important, it's kind of like upper funnel marketing. It just gets you interested in the idea of telly. It gets you to believe in the potential of telly, but it won't get you over the line in terms of dramatically changing what your business is doing, because there's all these other forces at play. And we strongly believe that the answer is in providing businesses with a individual single serving read of the impact that TV is having on their businesses, and that's really the goal for Lantern, is to provide that evidence for every advertiser, specific to them, so that they can see what TV is doing.
You mentioned that all of the commercial chiefs agreed that this was essential, and I think you hinted essentially at why they felt that way. Is it a sort of defensive posture almost?
I don't know about defensive. It's more, I guess, offensive in a sense that if you wind back 20, 30 years, the industry had invested and continued to invest a lot in eyeball measurement. And the transaction was, give us money and we'll give you this quantity of eyeballs, usually in pairs, I think. And that was sort of fine. And if you wanted to know what that had done for your business, that was sort of left as an exercise for the buyer. You go figure it out. You go buy an MMM or whatever, and Thinkbox did an amazing job of kind of grouping a lot of that and kind of surfacing the more general learnings. But in the intervening 20 years, you had these other products come along that are denominated differently. And, yes, they've got lovely salespeople, and yes, they've got all these other things, and yes, they can sort of fly you out to Mountain View and whatever and put you in a robot taxi. But fundamentally, it's the products. The products are denominated in an outcome. So you are able to say to your finance team, we gave Google or Meta 10 million quid and we got 50 million worth of clicks or app installs or something else. So they're fundamentally a different product. And you had a period where the industry was just saying, oh, it's not fair, and those measures aren't necessarily right, and what about incrementality and all of these other things, and lots of kind of hand-wringing, and what about brand, and you've got to believe in brand. It's like, it's not a religion, last time I checked. I mean, maybe Jedi made it through on the census, but, it's just, Lantern is really about us saying, right, okay, in the end, buying outcomes rather than buying eyeballs has won in the market. So we can either sit on our hands and just ignore that, or we can say, no, actually, we've got a fantastic ad product and it is great at doing those things, but we haven't surfaced that in a way that can play a part in those finance conversations. And that's really what it lets us see. So whether that's defensive or not, I don't know.
I think it's both, isn't it? It's defensive and it's offensive as well. So it's I think a lot of the new businesses that sort of growing up in today's world are being born in the world of advertising with this expectation of getting a read on the impact their advertising is having. They're growing up on social and on search, and they're very used to that way of working. So at that transition to TV, where you don't necessarily have that same kind of feedback loop, it's very, very frustrating and very, very scary to a lot of these businesses. So I think a lot of the capability that we built at Sky is where we're working with these kind of advertisers, and we're using our sort of addressable products, and we're using our measurement capability to provide them with that kind of evidence. And we know from this data that when we're providing that evidence, it's important to get them on in the first place to say, look, you come on, do this campaign, and we'll measure it for you, and we'll demonstrate the impact it's having. But critically, it's really important about getting them to come back and spend again, because then they've got the evidence they can take to their financial team and say, look, this is what we spent, this is how it impacted on our business. So really, I think we tend to be sort of skewing more towards smaller brands that are breaking through that kind of sort of performance ceiling, moving on to TV. And TV is different. It does work in a different way to search advertising or to social advertising. You do need to handhold a little bit more. But I think the idea for Lantern is that we expand that just beyond that, because I think there's a point where, as an advertiser, when you move into TV, you don't just spend with one sales house. You're going to be spending across all sales houses together, and you don't want, the worst thing you want are 3 different numbers floating around saying this is what TV did for me. And it's much better that we do it together and build that sort of the evolution of this product.
So it's definitely targeting smaller, medium-sized businesses, new to TV advertisers. I assume it also works quite well for established brands as too. But the idea is to make sure that newer to TV brands feel comfortable that you're offering them a similar level of outcomes-based measurement.
In a way, the whole purpose of the pilot is to figure that out. So there's these sort of, if you think about effectiveness measurement in general, you've got a bunch of ad exposures on the one hand, and you've got data on a bunch of outcomes on the other. And you've got to try and link those together. So the weird thing is, if you go really small, then you've not got enough data to figure out what happened. If you go really, really large, advertisers that are always on all the time in every medium, then it's quite hard for a different reason, which is that you can't see the sort of the wiggle of one thing changing because another thing changed, because there's just so much noise. So actually the sweet spot is probably in the middle. So it's more kind of scale up businesses, exactly as Matt says, you've maxed out on platform spend and you're thinking, well, what do I do next? Business is going well. I know there's more growth out there, but I don't seem to be able to get it with the tools that I'm using. And not only that, but actually in that sort of early stage when you're using, all the way through, really, but the TV is not only generating outcomes in its own right, it's also influencing those other channels. Imagine you're looking at your Google Analytics for a brand, and a bunch of stuff that arrives at your site is labeled as being from Meta or from Google. And there are some people who kind of, culturally, institutionally, they just take that literally. Go, all right, well, there's, 30% of our traffic came from paid clicks. That must be true. And of course, it isn't like that, but it's no good just saying it isn't like that. The point of this sort of work is that you're able to then uncover not just the end effects, but the intermediate effects. The way that TV can actually make your search clicks cheaper. It's not a thing that shows up in that sort of last event style analysis, but it's absolutely there as an effect. So the lovely thing about Lantern is that it lets us play tunes on that whole range of outcomes, if you like, from the intermediate through to the sort of more purchase related. It sort of makes everyone shuffle up on the bench and make room for us.
It's basically saying last click or attribution more generally. It doesn't tell the full story, which I think a lot of people in this industry, even the platforms, have been arguing that. Many of the platforms have been arguing that for years.
Yeah, well, there's a lovely chap, Pete Buckley, who's at Meta, ex-MEC, great planner, and he's very active on LinkedIn at the moment. So I'm saying, why are you brands using last click? It's craziness. And I've been on him through social saying, Pete, I blame you guys for this. Like this is your fault. You started this. And his example is, look, it's designed for brands that are just using one platform. So if you're just, all you're doing is using Meta, then you can probably, and it's right at the beginning of your journey, it's probably a really good indicator of what's driving your growth and your effect. But as soon as you start using other media, it just falls down. And I'd like to think that we're, as an industry, moving away from our reliance on it. I'm not sure we are. I think it's highly addictive, and I think it's, it's like what Rory Sutherland always talks about, is that people don't make good decisions. They make decisions that are easy to defend. And so, if you've got a bit of paper that you can show your boss that says, look, I've spent this money wisely, that's it, you're doing a good job. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of the decisions we make, and a lot of the bad decisions we make are we're not making it for the right reasons. Mm.
Which sort of gets us on, onto, I don't know if you want to cover this now or later, but it gets us onto the I word, incrementality. And, there is this sort of pattern where a smallish business will tend to spend all of its money with whichever rep got to them first, be it Meta or Google. But within that, Pete, the way Pete talks about this is interesting, because actually, if you're an ad product person at Meta, it burns you up. Absolutely burns you up that Google makes all this money off clicks, because you've done evidence till you're blue in the face showing how clicks don't really correlate with anything worth a damn, and there should be other stuff that you're looking at and so on. Meanwhile, there's an ad product person at Google who is going, people who are buying last event, it's ridiculous. We can see it in the data that actually there's a whole load more going on than this. But it's incredibly difficult to dislodge, because once that's embedded within an org structure, you try and go into a company where the in-house search team has been used to saying, we're driving all this revenue for the business. Are they going to want to shift to a different form of measurement that actually makes their impact look smaller? No, of course they're not. That's turkeys voting for Christmas. It's not going to happen. Similarly, the ad, this is where actually I think the boundaries are different to the way that we think of them, because the ad product people in the platforms who think about this stuff very deeply, they're actually thinking the same thing as us, which is that weaning the industry off that sort of last event type measurement and into something that's more attuned to the incrementality and more attuned to the ways in which communication can frankly be weird is something they want to do as well. It's just they've created a rod for their own backs, because there are these armies of people pushing buttons on the platforms and arguing about, just look at LinkedIn and all the people who go, PMAX is terrible because of this. No, PMAX is there to, in the nicest possible way, get you to do a different job, because the machines can generally do it better than you. Mm. And so that's where we're heading, is this world where actually we'll be on a more level playing field, because we're thinking about incrementality. And the sort of the ultimate thing you want to get to is how can I do communication to the people who wouldn't otherwise have bought?
Right.
And that's really where we're heading medium term, is towards sort of incremental measurement. And then all the different media will then be able to rock up and we can have a more sensible conversation about what's making the difference.
With regard to Lantern, cross-industry collaboration can be a very big challenge. I think everyone would admit here. Samir, you're laughing. How are broadcasters, at Sky, ITV, Channel 4's not in the room, interacting together to operationalize this and actually make this work? I think, what was the metaphor you gave for it a couple months ago? It's like porcupines mating.
Oh God, yes. Sorry, that was it's
fantastic metaphor.
An inappropriate joke to tell. Yeah, it's the joke about.
Well, podcasts are unregulated, so you can actually make a more inappropriate joke if you wanted to.
It is. Yeah, the joke of porcupines have to mate very carefully, and it is a little bit like. I mean, even before you email, before I email Wayne at Sky or Katie at Channel 4, you're all programmed to do a little loop in your head, which is, okay, well, what if all of these emails were published? Would it look like industry collusion? Am I going to go to jail? And then you sort of think that through and you go, well, no, because the sort of the double-sided nature of competition law is that, yes, collusion is bad, but industry standards are good and you're allowed to have conversations like that. So that's where you then think about, okay, first step is let's go under the Thinkbox umbrella. That's a safe place where we can all talk. And then you get to have the sort of nitty-gritty conversations. Then you might progress through those for a little bit. Then you get to the sort of the legal dynamic where you get to, okay, well, we've decided we want to work together on this thing. The commercial grown-ups have all given it their blessing through the Thinkbox board. And now what are we going to do? Okay, well, who's going to pay the money? I mean, literally, what commercial entity is going to be shelling out? And what is that? Are we just going to do it and then give it away to the others for free? Or how do we set that up? Then there's the data sharing and that side of it. And, data sharing is complex enough when you're just doing it with one advertiser. Now you've got viewing data from Sky, you've got outcome data from Measure Protocol that we're collectively paying for. You've got all of these dynamics, and then everybody wants to see the outputs. The amount of legal work involved in that is huge, and it's not because anyone's being obstructive or anything like that. We've got a situation where there is strong mutual willingness to do this, but the people who are paid to be paranoid in our businesses and to think of the worst case, they rightly come up with loads of things that could go wrong. And so you have to work through those things. Well, what if, ITV suddenly decides to have a tantrum and withdraw from this? What happens to the contracts, and what about the money and the suppliers who are left dangling? And you have to think through all that stuff. And when it comes to thinking of all the things that can go wrong, there's just a lot.
I think there was a lovely quote used at the launch, which was, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that really nicely sums up collaboration. It's hard. It's there's a lot of trust that you need to have. It helps once you get to know each other better, and I think spending time together, working as a team together for the main group that's collaborating really, really helps. But you've got to remember that outside of that group, there are a lot of other people who have been competing with each other from the other companies for many, many years, and so it's not just sort of rational decision making; it's highly emotional as well. And so when you're doing these kind of projects, you will move at the speed of the slowest organisation, but for any particular decision in the journey, and that will change from one organisation to another, who isn't necessarily the slowest at each point. So it's why this type of stuff does take longer than I expect the industry thinks it should, but it's the nature of the beast in terms of when you are working with your competitors to try and achieve the sort of the greater good for the industry as a whole. And I think it helps that we've got Thinkbox. Thinkbox has been around for knocking on the door of 20 years now. So we we used to work together. We had Sea Flight before where we collaborated on that. So that gave us a sort of template to work from. So I think the more you do together, the easier it becomes. It's a tricky beast.
And where are we on that journey right now with Lantern? Samir, I think previously you mentioned that fingers crossed, knock on woods, can't confirm actually a date yet, but 2026 could be a proper launch date. At the moment, there's different layers of testing essentially that's going on.
Yeah, so this year we're running what I've sort of foolishly called Baby Lantern. I was sort of thinking of Luxo and Luxo Junior.
Makes me think of the Mario Kart, like the baby toad.
Ah, yeah, no, I hadn't done that
maybe
one.
this is too much of a millennial thing for this room. Yeah.
So it's listeners. He's saying that we're old.
No, that's I'm implying it.
It's a fair point to me.
Yeah, no, there is that. No, so Baby Lantern will be about. We have said the number, haven't we? Yeah, it'd be about it'd be about 6,000 households. So Barb-esque in size, if you want to think of it like that. But that's a pilot. And really it's a pilot to flush out all of the things end to end that might be concerns, whether that's, legal or technical. Can we make it all work? What size of campaigns does it work for, and all the rest of it? And in parallel with that, so and on that front, just to say, over the past month, we've now started to see live data. I say live data, it's complicated because what we're doing is we've gone to a company that has quite a clever way actually of getting historical data for people. It's a company called Measure Protocol, and what they run a consumer panel where you have an app on your phone and it gets you to do tasks in return for money. But rather than the task, which in the old days would have been answer a survey, the task is now connect us to your Google search account. And we can record we can explore your historical searches and so on. And it's all, fully above board. It's very explicitly consented and all of those good things. But the beauty of that is that you can go back over time, because we're all in an era of surveillance capitalism and whatever, and we all record all the things that we do everywhere. So it's actually quite easy to go and get 2 years worth of back data. Then the next bit was to go and kind of find the Sky servers and the UView servers that have the historical TV viewing of those people. And then really you just have to connect the two things together. And then suddenly you've got 2 years worth of back data for 2023, 2024, and that gives you a nice playground. And that's now gone live. So we've got that data, and we're just, the analysts are currently cracking their knuckles and poised over their keyboards to start analysing it. And then the learnings that we get from that, we will go into this sort of RFP process. I don't know, Matt, if you want to talk about that.
I think we're the Baby Lantern is about answering a lot of questions that we've got that are going to help us with moving it forward to the next phase. So we don't really know currently what kind of activity we're going to be able to get a read for based on a panel that size. What kind of advertisers are going to be in scope? How much do they need to be spending on TV? What's the reach of their campaign need to be? What's the responsiveness of their people to their campaign for us to be able to get a read? So this proof of concept will give us a lot of the answers to that, and then that's going to allow us to then put out a full RFP, which says, right, this is the direction we want to go in. This is the type of analysis that we're going to be wanting to explore, and come to us to tell us about your company, about how you'd like to approach it. And it could be Measure Protocol, but it could be all sorts of other companies that could be coming to us and saying, this is what we're proposing our solution to be. But we're going to know what's more feasible and how it's actually going to work based on the results we're getting from this proof of concept. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the RFI responses will be really interesting, and that will go out. I think we've all given our last batch of comments on the document, so that'll go out very shortly. And I'm curious to see how people respond to that in the industry, because the problem you've got is that all the panels, all the behavioural panels that are out there, and there are many. I mean, in the UK, there's probably about 6 or 7. They're all, on our sort of best guess, probably too small. It's expensive to do. It's cheaper than it used to be, and we can talk about the graveyard of single source panels, which is technically what this kind of thing is called, and why it is why so many of them have died in the past, and why we don't think that'll happen to Lantern. But all of these panels, they're sort of a handful of thousands, and typically there's an app, and you've got something on your phone, and there's varying ways of collecting the data, and at a few thousand you can sort of wash your face and make a bit of money selling that data. But then there's this kind of death valley where getting to 10, 15, 20,000 is really difficult, because if you invest ahead of that, you'll go bankrupt. But the use cases that would get you to the next scale aren't currently monetizable. So you get stuck. And so one of the things that Lantern can do is sort of bootstrap that process and say, look, here is a chunk of money. Now you as an industry think about this. And I strongly suspect that it'll be the people who are willing to collaborate in that part of the industry and to say, okay, the three of us together will do this thing and we'll pool our data, we'll harmonize it and whatever. I think that's where it'll go, because any one entity by themselves might not have the scale to do it, and might not have the sort of the runway to do it. So I'm fascinated by that whole thing. So so just to come back to your question, by the end of this year, we'll be deep into the RFP process, and we will also have finished the analysis of the sort of the baby Lantern piece. And it's a weird thing about data. Sometimes you can use data that didn't work to tell you how big the other thing needs to be. So, if there are some campaigns that we can measure in the sort of the mini panel and others that we can't, then you can do a magic bit of stats to then say, okay, given the variation we see in this data, how big does the end panel need to be? And that will then obviously determine the cost of it and all these sorts of other things. And then, who knows, other people may say they want to join in. They're very welcome, anybody listening, and it'll build from there.
The timing on this is really interesting because there's a lot going on in measurement this year, and cross-media measurement being a key topic, with Origin having launched in beta in September, and will presumably launch at some point during the year in, what do you call, not beta, proper launch? They'll come up with a flashy name for that, I'm sure. I'm curious how Lantern fits in to the timeline given, and to the measurement ecosystem more broadly, given a lot of brands say cross-media measurement's great. Origin was obviously originally funded from platforms, still to this day is. Where do you imagine Lantern sits with regard to, if I'm a big, let's say, FMCG brand or something, how am I considering Lantern versus something like Origin?
It's fundamentally completely different. So it's fulfilling a different purpose, and I think there is, because it's in the same, I don't know, realm as measurement. It kind of gets lumped together as potentially like this sort of rival, measurement setup that's going to be competing. It's not. It's very different. So Origin is about measuring campaign exposure. It's about understanding who's been exposed to an ad and on what platform they've been exposed to it, and what's the overlap between exposure between linear TV or between Facebook and Instagram, or Facebook and YouTube. So it's about understanding the exposure of a campaign, and also I think they're then looking to make a planning tool out of it to aid advertisers to basically be more efficient in their planning, and which I completely get and understand where they're coming from. For Lantern, we're trying to understand the impact that TV is having in terms of actual behaviours. So as a result of being exposed to advertising on TV, what are people then going on to do? And we're looking primarily about online behaviours, because that's probably the easiest place to look. Initially, it's the easiest place to measure, but ultimately will be, if you gave an example of FMCG advertising, most of that, the outcomes happen offline in the real world, in shops. And so in that case, down the road, what we'd be hoping to do is probably be able to work with shopper panels where people are scanning receipts, and you can see who's been exposed to advertising, what they actually went on to actually sort of buy and do in the offline world. So I think that it's very, very different. Origin and Lantern are very different projects. I think it's interesting with this kind of stuff is that it sort of gets touted around, and then the answer is, Origin will be where it will move on to outcomes. It will do outcomes down the road, and maybe it will. But I think primarily Origin is about exposure, and Lantern is about outcomes, and they're doing completely different things. Is that fair, Samir?
Yeah, no, it comes back to what we were saying earlier, which is that the majority of media money spent in the UK now is spent buying outcomes, not buying eyeballs. The denominator of the product. So we reckon that about 5 years ago, outcomes overtook eyeball denominator as the primary thing that people were spending media money on. And even for video ads, if you look at video in total across all the stuff that's on YouTube and all of telly and all the rest of it, probably last year or the year before. So in a way, Origin is about mopping up the remaining money that is still being spent on eyeballs, but that pool is shrinking all the time. Whereas Lantern is about how TV shows up in the context of the outcome denominated world. And obviously, we can't do what Google or Meta do because it's not like we have universal logins and millions of advertisers and data at planet scale that is predictive of outcome, which is all you need. I mean, if you want a planet scale money printing machine, you just need those three things. It's easy, really. But if you don't have, but if you don't have that, much as I would like it to be the case, ITVX is probably not the first thing that someone logs into on their new mobile phone at Christmas, right? Whereas Google or Meta will be. So fundamentally, that's the reason right there. But measurement is fine because you only need enough data to be able to show the link. And that's what Lantern will enable us to do. So yeah, Origin is about, I sort of joked about it being it's a victory lap for the platforms in terms of mopping up the remaining eyeball money. Whereas Lantern is the opposite. It's about going into the world of outcomes and saying, look, we've got something to say here. Mm. We're playing a role.
That's it. I think there's always going to be a need for both. I mean, Samir might disagree with it. Might be a bit where we have slightly different perspectives, but I don't think 10 years down the road, we're just going to be in a place where the only thing that advertisers are measuring their or planning their campaigns about is through outcomes. I think there's always going to be a need to, especially for certain categories, to understand that you're trying to reach as many people within your potential market as possible. I think the Byron Sharp rule around how brands grow is going to remain a sort of universal truth. Now, I think you might have a better way of measuring the short-term indicators of that potential long-term success. So maybe you'd be more looking at sort of, being able to get better understanding of the brand impact that your advertising is having. And that could be the outcome that you're looking to get a measure on. But I think reach planning will always be a fundamental part of media. I don't know if Samir's going to disagree with that.
No, I probably don't disagree. But I suppose where I find reach planning strange is, with all the stuff like attention and what have you, you've got people layering things on top of reach to try and make it predictive. And there's lots of agencies who do really interesting work about how, reach used to correlate really well and now it doesn't. Well, obviously, because all the reach measures are different and for lots of kind of messy industry reasons. Yeah, no, you're probably right. I mean, it does vary by industry. So the sort of the CPG world will always be laggards in that respect because their purchases happen elsewhere. But then you get into sort of the whole brand debate. And I mean, in the end, for all that we like measurement, media spend decisions are not rationally made. Mm. It's not like everyone sits down calmly and looks at the evidence and says, okay, we're going to allocate the money purely on this basis. There are habits and there are prejudices and there are shortcuts and there are ways of thinking. What Lantern will at least do is let telly show up in those other conversations where currently it's not represented and say, look, it was playing a part here. And in fact, some of the stuff that you were, was being apportioned to these other channels was actually, it was telly what done it. And so let's have a conversation about that. It's got to be both correct and engaging and persuasive. Because if it's not the latter, then you can be as right as you like. It's not going to change what people do.
Has brand advertising become kind of passé in an era where everyone's moving to, as you describe, outcomes-based measurement? People care about outcomes more than things that are maybe a little bit harder to measure, but also could be really impactful.
I find this one really gets my goat because it's we'll talk about, oh yeah, they've got a new CMO at that advertiser who really believes in brand. It's like, it's not a religion. We only ever, if you think about how we got to this, people listening of a certain age will remember the man or woman from Leamington Spa, which is where Millward Brown were based, coming to do a debrief. And if I close my eyes, I can still remember how those charts look. And they did these brand tracking studies where they'd ask a handful of people every week about, ad recall and stuff like that, and brand awareness. And then they would chuck in the TVRs, and then they would do a relationship between the two. And really, we only ever had those things because at the time, you couldn't show or couldn't routinely show the impact of your TV spend or your ad spend on anything else. So we started measuring brand as a way of letting the CMOs of the time keep score. And they could have something that said, look, my spend did this and it made this other wiggly line go up. But that has almost become sort of fetishized, and people, call back to the idea of brand in that sense. Go, we have to have these sorts of measures, and we have to. We don't necessarily. Yes, it's absolutely true that brand versus product is still relevant, and you will end up paying more for things that have a brand on them. And there's that. Lindsay showed this the Thinkbox piece. I didn't know about this, where you swapped out the product,
the brand to brand study, which is great fun. Where we basically did just that sort of social experiment where we took people's favourite brands, we substituted them and said, can you trial these products instead? So somebody loves Yorkshire tea. And we said, all right, we're going to send you some tea. And we sent some unbranded tea, which was, of course, Yorkshire tea. Right. But they didn't know that. They thought it was something else. And they just universally disliked it.
They actually disliked how it tasted.
Yeah, it didn't taste right. The washing powder didn't stick. The smell didn't stick to the clothes. The shampoo didn't make the hair squeaky clean. They all wanted to go back to their.
Sounds like brands are making a lot of bad products. Is actually what it sounds like.
But I think it's a lovely demonstration of the power of advertising in terms of. I think a lot of the times we rationally think that what we're trying to do is to get people to buy stuff. We're trying to sort of change behaviour. Really, what a big part of what we're doing is we're getting our products to taste better, to work better, because a lot of it's in our heads. That's the power of advertising. So that's why Samir has done some fascinating work in terms of the impact that advertising has on price sensitivity, and that it's you have a stronger brand. Therefore, you're able to charge more than your competitors, and that's where the volume of profit is really made. So my view would be brands remain fundamental. They're a critical part, and that will continue to be. I mean, I suppose what Samir was saying is it's not the way in that we used to think about it. We don't need to necessarily think about just brand tracking in the traditional sense. Do we need to change the way in which we're understanding the way that our brand is impacting on our profitability, on the way in which we can leverage the power of advertising to make money for our businesses?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is. I mean, it feels slightly embarrassing. It's always felt slightly embarrassing to talk about, but brands do allow businesses to make more money. That's ultimately, it's not a matter of faith or I think brands are nice things to have. That's what they let you do. Yes, there are consumer benefits and your tea tastes better and so on as well. But that's what's going on. But the sort of the model that we've had to date, because, going right back to the beginning of this conversation, because we've had advertisers having to do effectiveness work by themselves, we're into this sort of IPA effectiveness groove, if you like, where, people publish papers saying, my brand is affected by communication. My Yellow Fats brand is affected differently by communication than any other in the history of toast, which is obviously rubbish. It is not the case that media works totally differently for one brand versus another in a category. It's not even the case that media works totally differently for related categories. Broadly, it's similar, but we haven't for a long time had the kind of sort of cross-industry work that lets you understand that. So, I'm old enough to have been to some of Andrew Ehrenberg's lectures when he was alive. And that was the thing that he was absolutely passionate about. And it kind of spoke to this lapsed physicist in me. He was interested in law-like generalizations. How can we learn stuff that is not just a one-off? What are the laws of gravity in this market and in advertising? How does that all actually work? And then you had this period where all of the data, because it's been hoovered up by the platforms, those learnings are there. There is a model in the bowels of YouTube that knows more than any human has ever done about the relationship between content and context and audience. But no one has ever asked that model to translate its learnings for the humans. And it's all kind of sequestered in a data center somewhere near Heathrow. Whereas with Lantern, one of the other things that I'm really excited about is that it lets us, as an industry, start to look at these more general learnings, because we'll have all the brands in there. We'll have lots of different websites. We'll have all sorts of campaigns, and we'll be able to sort of drive out of that more general principles or rules of thumb, and start to sort of get a handle on what's good practice for all of us from a brand point of view, absolutely, rather than this sort of one by one advertiser at a time, everybody being on their own and afraid to share any learnings with competitors and so on. I mean, that possibly sounds a bit high-minded, but I do genuinely believe that's going to be one of the biggest impacts of it.
And I think it's also going to be important that with Lantern, what we're doing is we're unearthing the nature of how TV works. And I think we're not trying to compete with, search advertising on a like-for-like basis, because we know from the data we can see that search is right down the pointy end of the funnel. It's very, very good at what it does. People who are in the market, generating a sale, capturing that demand. And if we just try and compete on that basis and the way that we're measuring TV, we're going to lose. So we need to unearth the impact that TV has on yes, change of behaviour sort of immediately as a result of seeing the advertising. We then need to capture the sort of the lag effects, the fact that TV advertising is highly memorable and continues to work for a longer period of time. And then we need to unearth the effects of the improvement in brand that comes as a result of this TV advertising that probably works, a year, 2, 3 years down the road. And I think that's the tricky part with TV, is that we probably try and have to find all of these effects and how all of these effects are sort of working together and pull it into one space, as opposed to necessarily try and compete like for like with the tech players, because otherwise I think they'll just win.
Which is why the fact that it's going to be a stable panel over time is so important. There's a chap, Mike Sainsbury, who runs the ASI conference, which is sort of loads of audience measurement geeks getting together around the world.
Sounds really fun.
And it really is.
Jack, you should come.
It's a lovely community.
I would love to come.
I do.
I'd love to
no.
be a fly on the wall.
That would be. We'll sort that out. But yes, he said afterwards. He said, "No, very, very clear presentation, understood, but makes me sad because it's like TV throwing in the towel, isn't it?" I said, no, it really isn't. It's not. We're not just looking for those short-term effects, in the 5 minutes or the few days or the sort of the cookie attribution window's worth of time. We'll be able to look at these longer-term effects. I mean, we did a sort of, to make that a bit concrete for you, we did a thing a couple of years ago with another panel that's in this area, Viewers Logic. And they, again, have got multi-years worth of data for TV exposures and online behaviours. And we wanted to look at something quite subtle, which is the impact of sort of peak time spots, because it's a sort of commonplace. And if you're buying telly, everyone will say to each other, yeah, peak's really important because you got higher attention and all the rest of it. Is there any evidence for that? Was there evidence for that? No, not really. It was sort of broadly done on gut and intuition, and that's why it got the higher prices and all these sorts of things. So we said, hang on a minute, let's try and look at this. Now, the thing is, you can't look at that. That's quite a subtle thing, right? So you can't look at it on a single brand basis because you'll never have enough data to prove it. So we took 50 brands, all of whom sell stuff through a website. And we looked at all of their campaigns together, and then we split that by day part. And we looked at how long the effects carried on for driving traffic to site for breakfast versus peak time. And as soon as you do that, clear as day, there's this evidence of the impact of peak. And it turns out that the thing that everybody thinks is true is true. I mean, I drove the team mad because I've made them do the analysis at least 3 times. It was like, so boring. I don't want to come back and say something that everybody thinks we're going to say because they'll just think we've made it up. So we got lots of, data friends to try and kick the analysis and prove that we got something wrong, and we hadn't. And so those sorts of things, to be able to show, okay, these principles that we have in our heads, are they right or wrong? And, in that case, that one was correct. And, attention in that sense turns out to be relevant. But there might be other things that are sort of industry commonplaces that are false. And I'm really looking forward to sort of unpicking a lot of those and seeing what's true and what isn't.
Beyond Lantern, what do you think the core focus should be when considering how to develop the future of TV measurement over a longer period of time than just, let's say, the next year?
I think there's a lot we need to do over the next 5 years. I think we're going to be busy in the measurement space. So I think around the Barb table, we've got a number of projects that are very exciting. The Barb, I think they're above.
They're right above our heads, actually, as we're recording this.
They'll be banging on the floor. We're looking at getting return path data into Barb, and I think that was an article that came out in Media Leader the other day, reporting on the progress we're making there. So I think that's pretty critical that we move the way that TV is measured into the digital world. And there is return path data. Sky currently sitting on a 4 million panel. There's a company that's able to measure sort of free view viewing on HBB TVs. And so can we incorporate that data and not get rid of the panel? You still need the panel to understand who's actually in front of the telly and the length of the sessions and all sorts of detail that you just cannot get from device-based data. But you put the two together and we should have this lovely sort of harmonious detail. And I think that this will lead us into a better place from in terms of our effectiveness measurement, because it gives us a better detail in terms of exposure. I think there's all sorts of potentials for improving the way that we could feed market mix modelling. So I think currently that's a little bit slow. And I've chatting to some of the team who worked on the sort of profitability study, or saying, in your dream world, how would the data that you get from the likes of Barb change? And I think the increase in the granularity, increase in the regularity, being able to tap straight into that data through an API would change their ability to, and the time frame through which they can start to report on the effectiveness of TV. So those would be a couple of things for me. Is moving the way that we measure TV into the modern age of media measurement, and increasing the sort of the granularity and the sophistication of the way that it can be used in modelling going forward.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if you zoom out, in a way, this is the way it'll play out. It's all of the sort of chickens of digitization coming home to roost. So, I said earlier that in the sort of 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, single source panels were a thing, but they were eye-wateringly expensive. Because if you think about what you had to do at the time, with 70s tech, if you had a TV panel, you'd have to take some special, customized, very expensive bit of electronics and install it in people's homes and pay them lots of money for the privilege. And that was how TV metering worked. Then if you wanted the purchase data as well, you'd also then have to give them another bunch of kit to measure all their purchases and, record their receipts or scan things at home and so on. That's why it's called Nielsen Home Scan, because you had one of those sort of bippy things like you have in the sort of self-checkout. And that was expensive as well. And so having 2 lots of expense for one group of consumers was incredibly difficult to sustain. But now we're in a world where the telly in your home is a digital device. You use the internet and you have lots of different accounts that have all of these behaviors tracked. And so the sort of the cost per consumer to collect all of that information and join it together has dropped by orders of magnitude. And that is really what's opening up the possibilities. That's what opens up the possibilities for Lantern, but also for some of the things that Matt's talked about in terms of the eyeball measurement and the reach side of it. And seeing how that all comes together, I think, will be really interesting. But it'll have some interesting consumer consequences. So, for example, in Germany, where there's a couple of countries that are ahead of the UK in this regard. So Germany, Austria, where weirdly there's a company that's a spin-off of Red Bull that does part of this. I know, bizarre. There you go. And then Spain as well. Consumers in those countries have gotten used to the idea that when you turn on your bog standard telly that you just bought from the shop and you plug it into the aerial, plug it into the internet because that's what you do these days, and you tune into something, so you're still in that mindset of I'm receiving a broadcast signal over the air, the telly starts asking you questions and saying, oh, we might want you to log into this thing. Now, if you're setting up a TV stick, you'd kind of go, yeah, of course I need to log into Netflix or whatever. But consumers haven't gotten used to the idea that you might need to log in to watch linear telly, but certainly on Freely TVs, that's what you have to do. And that, the way that plays out, I think, coming back to the research angle on this would be really interesting to sort of understand, okay, what happens when you present a German consumer with the choice of logging in and having their viewing recorded or not? Turns out about half of them say, no, thank you. But actually, is that half empty or half full? I would say that's only half. Whereas, the decline rates on cookies on the website probably a lot higher. So there's really interesting things going on there on the consumer side of all of this. And I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. It's a really fascinating way to end it. Thank you both, Samir and Matt, so much for joining me. What a fantastic discussion. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting us in, Jack.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on our website at themedialeader.co.uk. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.